My father, who was prone to domestic violence, threw my mother to the ground and slashed my thigh open. Resolute, I decided to flee to my uncle's with her. On the way, we chanced upon a green-eyed werewolf twice. When we met again, he turned out to be a member of the ranch staff, and I felt a curious, faint flutter of attraction toward him. I'm sitting in the pickup truck, with a horse trailer hitched to the back, my cheek pressed against the cool car window. Mom's driving, humming an old country tune, and giving me a break. But I can't even make out the melody. After 3 days on the road, a journey that feels like half a century has passed, my mind has already flown ahead to our destination. I let out a long sigh and turned to ask, how much longer until we stop? I can't hold it anymore. Mom glanced down at the fuel gauge, then took another quick look at the GPS, shrugged her shoulders, and said, it'll be 20 minutes until the next gas station. Can you wait? Or should we pull over and find some bushes? She gave me a teasing smile, knowing full well that I'd never dream of doing something like that in a strange place. I can wait, I said, straightening up and reaching for the CD player's eject button. Hey, she frowned and glared at me. I'm actually listening right now. This song is making me drowsy. Can we switch to something more upbeat? Honestly, I can't believe you can listen to this for hours on end, I said, shrugging my shoulders. Silly girl. What's the point, if not to get you to fall asleep? She gave a little smile, but the warmth didn't quite reach her eyes. I stared at her for a few minutes. Her face was etched with exhaustion, her expression tense, and she kept glancing nervously into the rearview mirror, no doubt worried someone might be following us. Her long hair was pulled high into a ponytail, with a few strands of brown curls softly brushing against her temples. Mom had always been beautiful, even now, when a faint yellowish bruise still lingered on her cheek. I sighed, looked away, and rubbed my achy thigh. Once we got there, we'd finally be safe. 3 days earlier, I'd just graduated from veterinary school. That day, unusually staying home, I'd been tweaking my resume and scanning job postings for nearby veterinary clinics. Mom kept popping in every now and then to offer advice. She'd lived here most of her life and knew this place better than anyone. With Dad not home, I actually felt a bit relieved. Most of the time, he'd be drunk, his voice so loud it was downright frightening, and he loved hanging out at bars, flirting with waitresses and downing whiskey as if it were water. As a werewolf, his metabolism was lightning fast, and he had an astonishing tolerance for alcohol. I figured Grady Kane, though I rarely called him Dad, could easily chug 2 gallons of whiskey every single day. After getting drunk, he'd plunge into a state of utter disorientation, off to the bars to fool around, then coming home to punch Mom a few times before crashing out for the night. When he woke up, he'd head straight to the sawmill for another night shift. In my eyes, he was utterly worthless. Yet Mom still stayed by his side, probably held there by some invisible force. Every time she was betrayed, that force turned into waves of searing pain in her stomach. Sometimes I'd hear her quietly sobbing behind closed doors, utterly furious with him. Just then, Mom had just taken dinner out of the oven, the grease sizzling faintly on the bottom of the baking pan. I was closing my laptop and shoving it into my bag when Grady burst into the kitchen like an uncontrolled bull, stumbling through the door with such force that the doorframe slammed hard against the wall. His bloodshot eyes, sharp as poisoned nails, seemed to pin me down right where I stood. "What are you doing here?" he growled, spittle flying with each heavy breath. His steps were unsteady, yet charged with fierce determination as he lunged forward toward me. My hand trembled, and the documents scattered across the floor. Stammering, I replied, I live here." As I bent down to pick up the papers, my foot had just taken half a step backward, just enough to slip past him and make a run for the stairs leading back to my room, when he suddenly let out a beastly roar that made the kitchen windows hum with its intensity. My body froze instantly. I jerked my head up, staring straight into his eyes. His pupils were clouded with the haze of alcohol and raw fury, as if he were about to devour me whole. I nervously glanced at my mom. She'd just set the roast beef pot on the counter. The enamel pot clinked crisply against the surface as it landed. In an instant, She turned around and stood in front of me, her voice trembling uncontrollably. Grady, she just graduated and is busy perfecting her resume and looking for a job. Let's hurry up and eat. The food'll get cold if we don't. She reached out to give Grady a gentle nudge on the arm, but he swatted her hand away with such force that she stumbled backward 2 steps. I turned around and stared at his face. His eyes hadn't left mine for a single moment, not even once glancing toward Mom's direction. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Caroline, he snapped, whirling around to shout at Mom. The veins in his neck stood out starkly, twisted like writhing earthworms. Mom's face turned deathly pale. Instinctively, she shrank back, inching step by step toward the opposite end of the kitchen island. Her back pressed tightly against the cold tiles, her hands clenched so hard that her knuckles turned white. I stood frozen in place, every muscle in my body taut as a drawn bowstring, my heart pounding so fiercely it felt like it might burst through my ribs. Before I could even process what was happening, Grady suddenly crouched low, charging toward me like a predator pouncing on its prey, his arms wide open, ready to pin me down. Instinctively, I threw myself sideways, my knees slamming painfully onto the floor. The pain was excruciating, yet I managed to dodge his rush just in time. He missed completely, crashing heavily into the edge of the kitchen island with a dull thud. The impact sent dishes clattering off the counter, rattling noisily across the surface. Grady stumbled and turned around, his eyes blazing with even greater fury. He caught sight of the kitchen knife on the counter, snatched it up in one swift motion. The blade gleamed coldly under the light as he lunged toward me again, his arms swinging straight out, the tip of the knife aimed directly at my chest. I was so terrified that my body went numb with cold. I scrambled backward, rolling and crawling, until my back slammed into the cabinet. There was nowhere left to retreat. Just as the situation reached a desperate brink, I suddenly jerked my leg up and kicked with all my might straight into his knee. Grady let out a guttural scream, his knees buckling beneath him, and he dropped to his knees, but the knife in his hand didn't slip loose. Instead, it slid down and slashed across my thigh. Hiss! The instant the blade tore through the fabric, a searing pain exploded along my nerves. I glanced down and saw that blood had already soaked through my jeans, gushing out in a steady stream. Losing my balance, I tumbled onto the floor, groaning softly from the excruciating pain. In an instinctive reflex, I reverted back to my human form, clutching the wound tightly with both hands. Warm blood immediately began to seep between my fingers. No matter how fierce Grady used to be, he'd never once laid a hand on me. But today, he'd completely turned into a wild beast running amok. Mom's face turned deathly pale with fear, and she screamed as she lunged toward him. Grady, are you out of your mind? Yet he seemed not to hear a word. He jerked himself up from the ground in one swift motion, flinging aside the knife he'd been holding. The blood-stained blade clattered onto the floor and slid all the way to the corner of the room. He turned his head to look at Mom, his eyes so chillingly sinister they made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Slowly, he began to advance toward her, step by step. Mom was so terrified that she kept backing away, until her back slammed hard against the refrigerator with a loud thud. She tried to dodge, but Grady grabbed her hair in an iron grip and yanked her forcefully right in front of him. I lay on the floor, watching helplessly as Grady raised his fist. That callous fist, whistling through the air, came crashing down on Mom's face with bone-crushing force. Crack. The sound was sharp and crisp. Mom was sent flying backward like a rag doll, her back slamming once again against the refrigerator. This time, the impact was even more violent. The fridge itself shook slightly. She slid down along the cold metal door until she sank to the floor, her hair tangled wildly over her face, and a trickle of blood immediately seeped from the corner of her mouth. Don't you dare raise your voice at me. This is my home. Grady was seething with rage. He leaned over, grabbed his mom by the collar, and spat right onto her face. His other fist was still hovering in midair, as if it were about to come crashing down again. Mom covered her eyes with her hands, her body trembling slightly, yet she didn't say a single word. She just stared fixedly at the floor, not even having the courage to lift her head. A wave of furious anger surged through me in an instant, drowning out the excruciating pain in my leg. I struggled to pull myself off the ground, snatched up the knife from the corner of the wall, still stained with my own blood, and with my other hand, I fumbled for my phone, clutching it tightly in my fist. Enduring the throbbing pain in my leg, I limped toward the back door, the doorknob creaking under my grip. I glanced back at Grady, my eyes filled with hatred. He was still yelling, gripping my mom's collar, while inside me, there was only one thought. I had to get Mom out of this hell. I'm going to call my uncle. He's the alpha of the wolf pack. Our house is located right on the very edge of the pack's territory, closest to the human town but farthest from the other pack members. My father never wanted to get too close to the other wolves. He loved being alone. I think that's how he managed to intimidate my mother without anyone noticing, especially that alpha male. Our property spans 5 acres, and in the backyard there's a fenced pasture with a stable. We keep 2 horses in the stable, and I've trained them all by myself. I'm incredibly proud of that. My father hated the fact that I was so good at taking care of animals. He'd always make snide remarks, saying, "Who would have thought someone as weak as you could actually tame any animal?" He really was a jerk. I hobbled over to the barn and dialed my uncle's number. As soon as he picked up the phone, he answered right away. "Hey, Ash. I heard you graduated." "Congratulations," I said, but as I climbed over the fence, my leg bumped into the railing, and I couldn't help but burst into tears. He heard my voice. "Ash, what's wrong? I think you'd better come over right away. My dad's drunk. He stabbed me in the leg with a knife, and he's now inside the house with Mom." He punched her in the face, I added, starting to cry, something I rarely ever did. My uncle didn't know that Mom was being abused. She'd never told anyone about it. She felt so ashamed. Whenever there were visible bruises or injuries on her body, she'd do her best to avoid others. She'd always told me not to tell Uncle Tobias under any circumstances. But this time, I simply didn't care anymore. My father had to pay for what he'd done. I heard my uncle hang up the phone without even saying goodbye. I knew that within minutes, he'd be rushing over with several law enforcement officers. 5 minutes later, my Uncle Tobias arrived with his beta and 3 law enforcement officers. He saw me sitting in the pasture, leaning against a fence post and pressing down on my leg with my hand. The wound had almost stopped bleeding already. All I needed was a few stitches to prevent scarring, but no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't manage to get to the barn to fetch my first aid kit from the office. My whole body was trembling with anxiety. Tobias gestured to his beta, asking him to give me a hand, while he himself stepped into the house. One of the law enforcement officers stayed outside, keeping a fixed, intense gaze on me and occasionally glancing toward the small door my uncle had just walked through. I heard some shouts, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The beta helped me stand up, and together we headed toward the barn. I quickly cleaned the wound and stitched it up. Then, we made our way back outside. As we started walking toward the house, I suddenly saw Grady being violently thrown out the door and landing in the yard, followed closely by the 2 enforcers who had been inside the house just moments before. A few minutes later, my uncle emerged, cradling my mother in his arms. Her face was covered in blood, her lips were split, and a trickle of crimson ran down her forehead. I could hear her softly sobbing. The officers grabbed Grady by both arms and dragged him to his feet. A 3rd officer began punching him hard in the face. My uncle said something to them, his voice so low that I couldn't make out a single word. They simply nodded, then tossed Grady into the bed of one of the trucks and drove off. My uncle abruptly turned his head toward me, locking eyes with me. "Ash, get in the car right now. I've got to take your mother to the doctor first. And after that, we'll have a serious talk." He strode quickly toward the car and helped my mom settle into the back seat. Beta helped me hobble over to the car and gently helped me into the back seat. I softly laid my mom's head onto my lap. She sat there quietly, softly sobbing. And so, we finally left Northern California and said goodbye to those breathtaking redwood forests. Both of us received medical treatment at the hospital and afterward, We stopped by to spend some time with my uncle, who was busy making a few phone calls. He asked me if, given the condition of my leg, I'd be able to drive myself. I actually could have. It was my left leg, and the truck had an automatic transmission. We returned home, packed up a few belongings, loaded my horse and its tack, and then set off for Montana. We were headed to a place just outside Great Falls. If we were both in peak condition, we could easily make the trip in 2 days. But we'd need to stop more frequently to let my wounds heal. During our travels, we can't perform dimensional shifts. Doing so could be extremely dangerous. Yet, dimensional shifting is precisely the fastest way to recover. I had no idea I still had family in Montana, but apparently I do have an uncle who's the head of the Montana Lone Wolf Ranch. Of course, that name is just a cover, so humans never even suspect a thing. And sure enough, it really is a horse ranch, which fills me with excitement. What really caught me by surprise was that I'm supposed to become their veterinarian. This was part of an agreement my uncle made, designed to help us start a new life. He didn't want our mother to feel ashamed of what happened in the past, so he fulfilled her one and only wish, to move away from here and start over. We pulled into that little gas station, which seemed to be located in the middle of nowhere. At the time, we were somewhere in Idaho. It seemed to me that I saw a sign that read Idaho Falls, though I wasn't entirely sure, since I was half asleep at the time. Mom pulled a car up next to the gas pump and handed me her credit card so she wouldn't have to go inside the store. She didn't want anyone to see her face. Her wound was still healing, and she didn't want people staring at it. I pushed open the door, and as soon as it swung open, a little bell tinkled softly. Behind the counter stood a man, deeply engrossed in reading a magazine. He looked up, and our eyes met briefly. In that instant, I understood it was a werewolf. We'd definitely wandered into the territory of another wolf pack. We needed to hurry and get this over with, then hit the road right away. I walked up to the counter, pretending everything was perfectly normal. I handed him my card and said, "Could you please fill up the number 2 pump for me?" He glanced out the window and noticed that Mom had already raised the fuel nozzle and was standing there, waiting patiently. At the same time, she was looking around cautiously, carefully scanning the surroundings for any signs of trouble. He snatched the card from my hand, swiped it briefly, then silently handed it back to me. "Thanks, sir," he said. "Could I please use the restroom?" He let out a snort and nodded toward a sign on the right that read restroom. Smiling, I thanked him and headed for the restroom. I quickly took care of what I needed to do and then stepped back outside. Now there was one more man in the small convenience store. There wasn't a single car parked outside, which struck me as a bit odd, but I kept walking anyway. "Hey, girl," the man behind the counter called out. I turned around to look at him and raised one eyebrow, asking, "What's wrong with her face?" He pointed out the window, signaling that my mom was staring at me through the glass door, her battered body clearly visible. "She got into a fight," he said. I didn't know what else to say. Our community absolutely does not tolerate domestic violence. Once it's discovered, it's a capital offense. "By the way, my father is probably about to be sentenced to death," Alpha said. "They'll torture him a little first, then carry out the sentence once he's regained consciousness." Another man in the store stepped toward me. "Ladies, are you two running into any trouble?" He scanned me up and down. I was wearing denim shorts, and the healing wound under my eye was clearly visible. Oh no, I thought to myself. I glanced at the clerk behind the counter, then turned back to this man who seemed able to strip me bare with just a glance. "We're just passing through Montana. We're doing fine," I said. Just as I was about to turn and leave, the man grabbed my wrist. "You don't look so great," he said softly. At that moment, he was standing right close to me, and I took a good, careful look at him. He's really handsome. His hair is a rich, dark brown, and his sharply defined face is adorned with 2 dimples. He sports a light 5 o'clock shadow that only adds to his charm. He's wearing cowboy boots, and his body is wrapped in tight-fitting jeans. Under other circumstances, I might have lingered a bit longer, but we really need to get out of there fast. I yanked my hand away abruptly. "We don't want to get into any trouble. We'd better hit the road soon. Thanks for your concern." I headed toward the door as quickly as possible. Each step I took sent the little bells on my bag jingling softly. I glanced back at Mom, urging her in my mind to hurry up and get into the car. At that moment, her eyes widened in sheer astonishment. No sooner had I turned around than I heard the door behind me open, and there he was. The handsome man followed me outside. He stood about 2 feet from the door, hands casually tucked into his pockets, never once taking his eyes off me. I bolted into the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, glanced back at him for a moment, and then we started the car and drove off. He just stood there, watching our car grow smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared from sight. I sighed deeply, slumping into my seat, my heart urging Mom to speed up and get us out of this godforsaken place as soon as possible. We'd just left the main highway and were now driving somewhere on the outskirts of Big Falls. I pulled the truck into that enormous truck stop. The lot was packed with giant semi-trucks and massive pickup trucks, some even towing trailers. Mom was asleep in the passenger seat, her seat reclined all the way back. She'd wrapped herself in a fluffy blanket. I glanced over at her and gently tapped her shoulder. Then I jumped out of the truck to fill up the tank and take the opportunity to stretch my back and loosen up a bit. We were almost there. I guess Mom had only just woken up when I closed the car door. I heard the passenger door close, and she walked around to the front of the truck. "Hey, Ash, I'm going in to use the restroom. Do you want a cup of coffee or something?" I gave her a thumbs up, and she pulled her hat down over her head, trying her best to hide her face. I leaned back in the truck's rear seat, closed my eyes for a minute, and rested while I waited for the fuel pump to click, indicating that the tank was full. After filling up, I looked around. There was a wide expanse of grass beside the gas station. I drove the truck to the edge of the grass and jumped out to give the horses some exercise. They'd been cooped up in that trailer for days already. I made sure to let them out as much as possible. I walked back to the back of the trailer, yanked open the door with a quick motion, then locked it behind me. I leaped up and grabbed my horse, Belly, letting her stretch her legs and loosen up a bit. Belly's a lasso horse. I used to ride her often when driving cattle back to our old ranch. I'd been hoping she'd come in handy at our destination. As I stretched my legs, I felt a slight twinge in my thigh. The wound had mostly healed already. Although it would leave behind an almost imperceptible scar, overall, I felt pretty good. I was walking Bailey back and forth across the grass when suddenly she stopped dead in her tracks, her ears perking up. I stepped closer and gently rubbed the side of her face. "What's the matter, girl? Nervous?" Her nostrils flared slightly toward me. I glanced around but didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so I turned around and led her horse back into the trailer. As I entered the trailer and was about to fasten her lead rope, Buck suddenly took a step backward. Buck is my gelding. He's a buckskin, which is how he got his name. I don't think I could have come up with anything more original than that. Mom walked over carrying a cup of coffee and handed it to me. "Want me to drive?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "No need, I've got this. We're almost there, aren't we?" As I spoke, I stepped out of the trailer and turned Buck's huge rear end toward the side of the trailer. Mom glanced around, pulled her phone out of her pocket, and checked our location and navigation route. Looks like we've still got about 2 hours to go. "I just picked up a few breakfast burritos from the store. They look pretty good, actually," she said half-jokingly. "I'd better hurry back to the car. I don't like it when people stare at me. I've gotten plenty of weird looks over there," she added. Just as she was about to walk away, I tugged on her arm. "Mom, you really need to stop worrying so much about what other people think. Everything's going to be fine." She nodded. I couldn't help but ask her, "Have you smelled any other wolves around here?" She glanced back at me, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Maybe there's 1 or 2, then. Definitely a couple of super cute cowboys," she said with a wink before heading toward the truck cab. She knew exactly what my soft spot was. I stayed by Buck's side, pacing back and forth across the grass for a few minutes, talking softly to him and gently stroking his thick, jet-black mane. He was a massive horse, with a fawn-colored coat. Most horses weren't as big as he was, but he was a gentle giant nonetheless. He wasn't easily spooked. So when he suddenly stopped at the back of the trailer and let out a loud snort, I knew something was wrong. I turned my head toward the edge of the bushes. Just beyond my line of sight, a huge chocolate-brown wolf stood perfectly still, its bright green eyes fixed intently on me. I wasn't sure what he was up to. Was he trying to scare me, or was he just watching? He made no attempt to approach, and it seemed as though no one could even see him standing there. My trailer was blocking the view. When the wolf remained completely still, I turned around and led Buck toward the back of the trailer, preparing to load him into the vehicle. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept an alert watch on the wolf. Just as I leapt out of the trailer and slammed the gate shut, the wind shifted, and I caught a whiff of a scent so exquisite it seemed like a blend of musk and leather. I tilted my head slightly, glancing toward the edge of the woods, where the wolf was still standing, staring straight at me. Strangely enough, I didn't feel threatened at all. I walked over to the taxi, climbed in, and as I closed the door and started the truck, I couldn't help but glance back toward the woods one last time. The wolf was gone. We drove along the paved road for about 2 hours. We'd already left the interstate and were now traveling on a two-lane country lane. Bold most of the road on either side was lined with trees, and every now and then, a few scattered houses would peek through the foliage. When Mom signaled for me to turn right, we slowed down and drove onto a dirt road that appeared ahead. I glanced at the signpost, Red Wolf Road. That was pretty obvious, wasn't it? After driving along the dirt road for about 5 minutes, we came to a massive gated driveway. Above us hung a wrought iron sign that read Solitary Wolf Stables. We'd finally arrived. We parked our truck next to the guardhouse, and I pressed the button. A rough, gravelly voice replied, "Who's here?" In the cheeriest tone I could muster, I said, "Caroline and Ashley Kane." For a minute or two, the house remained utterly silent. Then, the gate slowly began to open. I drove the truck inside, and as soon as the trailer had just cleared the gate, it swung shut swiftly behind us, bold. As we drove through the gate, I glanced around. I noticed several cameras trained directly on the entrance, and there seemed to be a motion sensor as well. Wow, I thought to myself, the security here is really tight. Surprisingly, the road itself was paved. We wound our way along a long, twisting highway, and suddenly the view opened up before us. On both sides were vast pastures, each neatly enclosed by pristine white wooden fence posts and crossbars. I shook my head, marveling at how much effort must have gone into maintaining all this. One of the pastures was home to cattle, while the other housed horses. Seeing this scene made me feel especially happy. I turned to look at Mom, and I saw a radiant smile on her face. She must be just as delighted. Not long after, we spotted a house. I could only guess that it was the main residence combined with a stable. The house had 3 stories and was surrounded by a colonnade. It looks like a wooden house, but it's enormous. Half the height of the front wall is made of stone. It's absolutely stunning. The main barn seems to be at least 200 feet long, entirely white with brown trim. As I drove the truck nearby, I noticed a long hallway running down the middle. This is truly the most beautiful ranch I've ever seen. Mom pointed to a spot and told me to park there. The 2 of us jumped out of the truck. At first, it seemed as though no one was around. We were heading toward the main house when a burly man stepped out from inside, wearing a broad, radiant smile. He was easily the tallest person I'd ever met. He stood at least 6 feet 6 inches tall, his muscles rippling beneath his skin like solid walls. He had dark brown hair, and his eyes were just like my mom's. I glanced at her, then turned back to look at him, and in that instant, I understood. This was my uncle. Mom dashed over to him and threw herself into his arms in an instant. He lifted her petite frame into the air, holding her high above his head like a child, and spun her around once. "Caroline, it's so good to see you." His voice was deep and resonant, perfectly suited to him. Uncle set Mom down and turned to look at me. You must be Ashlyn. I can tell you've inherited your mom's beauty." He winked at me. "I haven't seen you since you were about 2 years old, I think." I glanced at Mom, puzzled. I felt as though I'd never met him before, and Mom had never mentioned him either. Mom gave me a gentle smile. "Ashlyn, this is your Uncle Gabe. He left when you were just a toddler, going off to run the ranch for your great-grandfather. And ever since then, he's never come back." "Gabe," she turned to him and said, "come meet my daughter, Ashley." Uncle Gabe didn't even wait for me to approach. He was a towering figure, and in just a few long strides, he was right in front of me. He scooped me up in his arms and lifted me high into the air, spinning me around once or twice as if I were weightless. To be fair, I'm actually quite a bit taller than Mom's petite 5'3", yet to a wolf, she's practically a miniature version of herself. I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a perfectly proportioned physique and well-defined muscles. My rounded hips make even my jeans feel a bit tight. My chest often needs to be snugly tucked into a sports bra, especially when I'm working out or riding horses. "Welcome home, Ashley," Uncle Gabe said, unable to suppress a laugh at the look on my face, which seemed to say, "What on earth is going on here? You two must be absolutely exhausted. You've been on the road for days now, haven't you?" he asked. Mom nodded. Just then, my uncle began scrutinizing her face closely. Suddenly, he stepped forward in a furious rage, grabbed her chin with one hand, and turned her head sharply from side to side. He let out a low growl, his voice seething with anger, then lowered his head. "Caroline," he said, "I wish you'd told Tobias as soon as you realized what was going on. Then we wouldn't have gotten to this point. And besides, you really need to adjust your mindset so that all of this can finally heal." He turned around and started walking toward the house. "Come on," he said, waving his arm as he strode purposefully toward the house. Suddenly, I felt like someone was staring at me. I glanced toward the stable, and there he was, the same guy I'd seen at the gas station in Idaho, leaning against the doorframe, the very same man who'd once grabbed my wrist. I stared at him wide-eyed, my gaze fixed straight ahead. Under his black cowboy hat, his eyes burned with a laser-like intensity. Those bright green eyes stood out strikingly. Dressed in a black buttoned shirt and dark blue jeans, paired with leather leg guards and boots, he gave me a sly smile before turning and walking toward the end of the hallway. His tall, upright figure made me wonder if I was hallucinating. Uncle Gab cleared his throat on the porch. "Ash, it looks like you're really taken with this stable. Let's get you and your buddies settled first, then we'll catch up for a bit. After that, we can take the horses out to the pasture." His voice pulled me back from my daze, and I quietly replied as I headed toward the main house. My mother was curled up on a huge leather sofa, holding a teacup and chatting with a blonde woman, who I'd later learn was Jenna. "Your mom will stay in the main house," Jenna said with a smile. "As the vet, you'll live in the attic above the stable, so it'll be easy for you to check on the animals and run the clinic." Uncle added, "The clinic is perfectly legitimate, complete with an operating room, 3 veterinary assistants, and all the necessary medications, x-rays, and cutting-edge equipment. After all, we're raising some prized horses." I was so thrilled, I couldn't stop smiling. I jumped up alongside Uncle and said, "Let's head to your place and the clinic, then I'll bring out your horse." I couldn't help but giggle foolishly. Turning around, I saw my mother wearing a face full of deep satisfaction, a look I'd never seen on her since I could remember, one that made her seem utterly relaxed for the first time ever. Dawson recognized Ashlyn at a glance. It was the very woman he'd tried to strike up a conversation with at the gas station in Idaho Falls. Now, her leg injury had fully healed, and she no longer limped. As a werewolf, her healing speed was naturally far superior to that of a human. After attending his cousin's mating ceremony, Dawson climbed into his Dodge and drove back to the Lone Wolf Stables, the place where he'd been living ever since he turned 18. Back then, Alpha Gabe had spotted his talent for training horses at a trade show and invited him to join the pack. This place is renowned throughout the U.S. for producing some of the finest horses in the country. He goes home once or twice a year, and Alpha always graciously grants him time off. Just now, when he heard the sound of a truck, Dawson thought it must be the new veterinarian arriving, but to his surprise, the one who walked into Alpha's embrace was none other than Ashlyn and her mother. Werewolves have exceptionally keen hearing. As soon as he heard the name Ashlyn and learned that she was Alpha's niece, he was utterly stunned. Earlier, at the truck stop, he'd already noticed Ashlyn's F-350 pickup truck and caught a glimpse of a bruise on her mother's cheekbone. At the time, he'd slipped into the woods, transformed into his wolf form, and secretly watched her from behind the bushes, her long brown hair tied back, wearing a baseball cap, makeup-free yet radiating natural beauty. Her blue eyes were framed by thick lashes, and her figure, clad in denim, exuded confidence and composure. She carried with her the fresh, rain-kissed scent he loved most. It wasn't until her horse sensed something amiss and their eyes briefly met that he hastily pulled on his clothes and fled. Now, right here, Ashlyn stood before him, and she'd even noticed him leaning against the doorframe. Her face was filled with disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. After giving her a sly smile, he strode away confidently. He knew that Alpha's niece was off limits, but at least he could still occasionally enjoy this breathtaking sight.